In this video, we will discuss Thomas Clement Mercier's essay, Uses of the Pluriverse, Cosmos Interrupted or the Others of Humanities. This paper talks about the idea of pluriverse, which has become more popular in recent years in certain critical fields like science and technology studies, geography, anthropology, and feminism. This concept suggests that there are many different ways of understanding reality and existence. It is a response to the idea of one universal way of thinking and advocates for an ethics that recognizes the diversity of perspectives and relationships between different beings and elements in the world. The paper argues that the idea of pluriverse is contradictory and does not work well if it is based on the idea that everything exists together at the same time. Instead, it suggests looking at a much broader diversity that exists before we even think about the pluriverse. This goes beyond different ways of thinking and also implies a fundamental interruption or a break in our usual understanding of the world. This raises important ethical questions about how we relate to others and the world around us. Scholars discussing the pluriverse often highlight its novelty and its departure from previous interpretative models, especially those associated with European modernity. This self awareness and emphasis on innovation is a distinctive feature of contemporary discussions on the pluriverse. The discourse also aligns with what is known as the ontological turn, which emphasizes the need to consider a broader range of worlds and life worlds beyond the scope of European humanities. Examining this pluriversal discourse, it is tempting to dismiss it as a passing trend or fashion. However, such an explanation would not capture the significance or necessity of what is unfolding in the scholarly landscape. It is important to avoid trivializing it as mere fashion, as it represents a genuine intellectual shift with substantial implications for how we understand and engage with the world. To put it simply, the discussions around the ontological turn often present themselves as a reaction against what is referred to as the linguistic turn. This reaction tends to lump together various authors and schools of thought under the label of the linguistic approach, which can lead to oversimplifications and misrepresentations. In his paper, Mercier focuses on how Derrida's ideas, particularly those related to deconstruction, are often misunderstood or misrepresented. This misrepresentation serves a specific purpose. It helps establish the legitimacy of the discourses aligned with the ontological turn. By either ignoring or distorting Derrida's views, these discourses position themselves as innovative and necessary. In doing so, they claim a new intellectual territory, implying that they are breaking away from the past approaches. The discourse of the pluriverse responds to the challenges posed by the Anthropocene, a term used to describe the significant impact of human activity on the Earth's environment. Thinkers like De la Cadena, Blaser, Latour, and De Castro suggest that we need to reconsider the separation between humanity and nature, which has been a key feature of Western thinking. They argue that Western traditions have viewed nature as something separate from humanity, leading to a division between culture and nature, mind and reality. This perspective, often associated with European modernity, has been linked to colonialist and imperialist tendencies. In contrast, the ontological turn proposes a different approach. It seeks to move beyond the limitations of European epistemology, which is seen as tied to linguistic approaches. It aims to directly engage with diverse worldviews and ontologies or ways of understanding reality. This shift emphasizes immanence, suggesting that understanding the world involves recognizing the interconnectedness of various perspectives and realities. The pluriversal discourse challenges the idea that there is only one universal nature. It contends that there are multiple, incompatible ways of conceiving the world, each reflecting a distinct ontology. This means there are not just different perspectives on a single reality, but rather different ontologies reveal the existence of multiple worlds. This shift from epistemology to ontology implies a deeper understanding of how different worldviews shape our understanding of reality. This approach also emphasizes the constructed and contingent nature of cosmologies or ways of understanding the cosmos. It calls for an analysis of the practices that contribute to world building, showing how various ontologies emerge through these processes. Anthropology plays a crucial role in this endeavor, providing the necessary tools to explore these complex relationships. In this context, anthropology takes on a new meaning. It no longer focuses solely on human discourse or the study of humans. Instead, it considers the interconnected agencies of both human and non human elements, including objects, imaginary beings, and natural forces. This shift represents a decentralization of the human perspective, embracing a post human understanding where language is seen as an embodied, material practice embedded in the complex networks that form our world. Moreover, in this perspective, ontology refers to the study of how things and beings act and exert their influence regardless of their nature. This understanding of ontology emphasizes practicality and performance. Cosmologies are seen as active processes that shape worlds through interconnected practices. These interactions are seen through the lens of a renewed political ontology. Mercier then writes about political ontology. Political ontology pertains to the ethical and political questions arising from the ontological turn, especially in the context of political ontology of the pluriverse. The challenge lies in the relationship between ontology and political reality or realism. While these discourses claim a return to realism after the linguistic turn, there is a potential issue with the conflating political and ontological aspects. For example, the idea of worlding practices being grounded in ontology may risk essentializing these practices and blurring the distinction between knowing and performing them. This conflation may lead to the potential erasure of diversity within each community or world. The pluriversal discourse, in its ontological form, might struggle to truly embrace pluralism and grapple with its own inherent performative violence. The uncritical reference to Carl Schmitt's political ontology, which states that the political world is a pluriverse, not a universe, poses its own set of theoretical and ethical political challenges. While it allows for a beneficial decentralization from Western imperialism, grounding this effort in ontology remains problematic. The repeated and uncritical reliance on anthropology as ontology in these pluriversal discourses, especially in relation to Schmitt's political ontology, raises significant theoretical and ethical political concerns. This calls for a deeper analysis of the potential issues associated with anchoring pluralization efforts within an ontological framework. In all its versions, the pluriverse idea rethinks the relationship between philosophy and anthropology in terms of how they understand existence. According to Latour, philosophy seen as ontology deals with being as being, while anthropology focuses on being as other. In this view, anthropology becomes a powerful tool for understanding different worldviews and cosmologies. De Castro even describes anthropology as the study of ontological alterity, viewing others as variations of ourselves. This perspective sees alterity or otherness as alternative possibilities that can be understood through ontology. It is important to note that this view of alterity grounded in ontology differs significantly from Derrida's interpretation. In this anthropological ontology, alterity is seen as reducible to being and understood within a strict ontological framework, which aligns with traditional European philosophy and epistemology. This ontological approach may resist deconstruction as it seeks to make the other understandable in terms of being present, aiming for a kind of common ground. This means that the pluriverse, through acknowledging the plurality of worlds, ultimately rests on a shared sense of being. This suggests that the pluriverse is only pluralistic against the backdrop of a common existence. This approach raises questions about non present worlds, those beyond our current understanding. How do we account for these worlds that cannot be grasped as being present? It prompts us to consider whether the assumption of symmetric ontology is realistic and if it is as pluralistic as it claims to be. Latour acknowledges that the term cosmology is used casually by anthropologists, and this transition from exact sciences to anthropology is worth examining. He also concedes that ontological cosmologies may result in a clash of worldviews, which challenges the pluriversal logic and the ontological turn. The use of logos or discourse in these discussions may bring the pluriverse concept dangerously close to traditional Western epistemology. This could inadvertently lead to a collision of worldviews rather than the desired pluralistic understanding. The ontological discourse about the pluriverse does not question the Western idea of world. This concept, represented by various terms like cosmos, mundus, world, welt, and more, has always been complex and debated within Western tradition. Strangely, the concept of world is not scrutinized by the literature on pluriverse thinking. Moreover, the translation of world from one context to another is never seen as problematic. It is assumed that the world means the same thing in every world, whether it is within Western thought or in non Western or indigenous cosmologies. The key issue here is the notion of cosmology, which underpins the entire pluriversal ontology. According to this perspective, all cosmologies relate to the same reality in their respective worlds. They do not refer to the same world, but they do refer to shared reality within their own world. This idea assumes that cosmologies are symmetric and relatively consistent in their ontological status. But this assumption leads to a fundamental problem. The concept of cosmology already implies a basic understanding of what a cosmos is. In other words, before any cosmology can be identified, there must be a pre existing idea of what the cosmos is. This idea is based on the presumption of a self consistent and unified cosmos, even if it is viewed in a constructivist or compositionist way. This foundational concept of world is rooted in the European understanding of cosmos. It becomes a starting point for all cosmologies. So, despite emphasizing plurality, the discourse of the pluriverse relies on a pre existing idea of world as a fundamental reference point. The term pluriverse risks becoming a more postulate or metaphor like a world in which many worlds fit, which defeats the purpose of calling it a pluriverse within the framework of ontology. The idea of pluriverse often serves as a metaphor, highlighting the metaphorical nature of the concept of world. Initially, pluriverse is a form of discourse, essentially a piece of text, before it represents an actual concept. Because of this textual nature, it risks being viewed merely as a figure of speech. However, the ontological approach, by sidestepping language and symbols, struggles to grapple with this metaphorical aspect of ontology and the concept of worlds. The pluriverse is primarily a term in a discussion. It is a symbol before it denotes a concrete idea or reality. But within this pluriversal discourse, grounded in ontology, the importance of language and discourse is downplayed, along with the inherent textuality and the structure of the narrative about the world and the pluriverse itself. By doing this, it masks the role of translation and the challenges it brings, ultimately avoiding the complexities of the ontological move while safeguarding it from the unmanageable distinctiveness and inexplicable otherness that remains essentially untranslatable. While there is value in trying to diversify cosmologies to include non Western perspectives, as long as this diversification stays rooted in cosmo-ontology, it might end up perpetuating the very logic it aims to bypass. The way ontological anthropology represents worlds remains resolutely human centered and language centered. This ontological move is an act of self defense, guarding anthropology, ontology, and Western philosophical ideas against the overwhelming impossibility of worlds beyond current human perspectives. It shields itself from a kind of heterogeneity that exists before language and being, before the concept of world or worlds itself. This is why the discourses discussed here tend to dismiss deconstruction, often misrepresenting it as merely a facet of the linguistic turn. By doing so, they seek to simplify Derrida's idea of difference as a mere distinction between language and reality. However, for Derrida, heterogeneity is not about the relationship between language and the world. This is why labeling deconstruction as part of the linguistic turn is incorrect. There is not a prison of language, it is quite the opposite. Deconstruction has always critiqued linguisticism. Linguisticism starts with the ignorance of the effects of text, which are the unbridgeable differences in traces. This heterogeneity precedes language. It exists before being and before the world itself. It implies a profound disruption that cuts through epistemologies and ontologies as such, before and beyond their categorization as distinct fields or practices. Difference as self interruption is what demands translation, making translation possible as an impossible task. Cosmos disrupted. Self interruption is what necessitates translation by rendering translation possible as an impossible task. That is, a non negative impossibility as a requirement for translating worlds. Nonetheless, the uniqueness of the other remains as it is, as other, and surpasses any and all representations of the world or worlds, even those of another world. Otherness interrupts the world and worlds. It presupposes the experience of this very disruption, before and beyond the world, any world. This is why translation comes before the world, before ontology, before being. This is what Derrida suggests, not just the multiplicity of languages and the associated need for translation, but also the experience of an extraordinary heterogeneity and multiplicity beyond ontology, one that can't be easily translated into the language of being. Derrida attempts to think about untranslatability in a non negative way as something that drives the desire and the need to translate. This untranslatability is not an insurmountable barrier, but rather an incentive to translate, an initial commitment to translate within the experience of the untranslatable itself. In this view, an experience of the world or worlds of worldliness, as well as in any experience in general as an experience of the other, becomes possible. What arises here is the question of the horizon of expectation, that is, the question of an experience without a predetermined outcome, a connection to the future, to the other, to the event, and to death, beyond any predetermined outcome, which means beyond any world that is inherently possible. Yet there is world. Ultimately, this boundless otherness, this absolute incommensurability of an immeasurable distance, does not stop things from occurring, communicating with one another, engaging in conflicts, dreaming of peace, being overwhelmed by compassion. On the contrary, this otherness, this impossibility, sets the stage for them to occur. There is an endless array of untranslatable worlds, and this untranslatability is the prerequisite for the arrival of one for the other.